Okay, I wanted to give everyone a quick update and a little backstory on a vehicle I get asked about still to this day a whole lot, and that was my 99 Dodge Durango that had an 8.3 liter Dodge Viper engine in it. For those of you who don't know, in 2009 I was the feature editor for Petersen's 4-Wheel and Off-Road magazine. At the time, the most popular platform there was the Jeep Wrangler JK. It just came out in 2007. People were like, whoa, it's a four-door Wrangler. It was just everywhere. And so I had a meeting with my boss at the time, which was Rick Payway, and my coworkers, Fred Williams and Jared Jones and Kevin McNulty. And I said, hey, like, let's build a JK alternative. Like, what's something cool? But like, it's gotta be like something that is like got a V8 and, you know, let's do something cool. So we started looking like what platforms were out there that would make sense. I knew if I was gonna build it, I wanted something with body on frame construction. I was just gonna make fabrication easier for suspension bits and things like that. I thought a V8 would be nice, and I wanted a platform that wasn't gonna be super expensive. So when you start looking at those variables, what I came up with that I thought made the most sense was a Durango. Once I started doing research for them, I found, man, you can get one of these things pretty cheap, and all I really need to do is swap the axles out, and this thing could be a pretty awesome off-roader. So that's kind of the catalyst for why I started looking for a Durango. I had a buddy at the time that was living in Nacogdoches, Texas. He owned an off-road shop called Old Town Customs. Guy's name is Carl Yarborough. Still buddies one day, great guy. And I told him this idea. The next thing I know, he calls me up and he goes, man, I think I found your Durango. It's a 99, it's got low miles, it's got the 5.9 V8, 46 RE, 242 transfer case, basically everything that you were looking for, and I think you can get it for like $3,000. I was like, sold. Let's do it. So bought the thing sight unseen, kind of had to figure out where am I going to build it. And he's like, hey, if you want to come to Texas, I'd love to help you build this thing. And I'm like, oh man, that's kind of, I was living in California at the time. That was sort of a big deal to just go to another state in the middle of the country and build a car. But I'm like, well, maybe this would make sense. So I started looking at, well, if I'm going to build it in Texas, like what makes sense to build it in Texas? And I had this idea. There was Red River Parts and Equipment that wasn't too far away, and they specialized in surplus military parts. And I was like, man, I can get a set of Rockwell axles pretty cheap. I was like, ooh, 2.5 tons, that would make this thing kind of, you know, really wide and stable, and Rockwells were still really readily available at the time. And, you know, I was like, let's just do it. No one had ever built a Rockwell anything for the magazine. And I thought this would be awesome. Like, I want to be the first guy to build a Rockwell something. I'm from North Carolina. That'd be awesome. So that's kind of why it was, all right, Durango and Rockwells. It just sort of made sense. At the time, I thought, man, a high pinion 60 and a 14 bolt would have been a little bit better because, oh, it'd be more drivable. But I was like, man, Rockwells are cheap. Let's build something that's cheap and fun. And then I think it was just a joke at lunch one day. I was like, yeah, it's my heavy metal mutter. It's just really heavy. And they're like, oh, you should call it that. And I was like, all right, it's stuck. Wasn't my favorite name, but that's how it came up. And it was always like, are you building a mud truck? That was never really my intention, but the name sort of stuck, and that's why it became the heavy metal mutter. Built that thing in the magazine. I think it was like 6 or 7 issues. In real time, it was about 3 months of me going to Texas and coming back and forth. Ended up getting it all built up. Super happy with how it came out. We used a lot of off-the-shelf like JK parts. I think we had Terraflex long arms, some rock crawler bits in there, rock crawler coils. Just trying to find like what Jeep stuff that we could showcase. So like, look, you don't have to fabricate this. You can just buy this. Like, here's a ballistic tower. Here's this. Like, I wasn't trying to recreate the wheel with this. My goal was like, hey, you can build something fairly inexpensive that's still pretty awesome. So I feel like we really accomplished that goal of building something that wasn't super expensive and that just looked awesome. I should mention the caveat of that thing being purple and then turning to tan. Carl had a buddy that was painting Hanjin containers for whatever military storage things for the military, and ended up just painting that thing for me over Christmas break while I was back in NC visiting family. I showed back up to Texas with my trailer and I rolled in. I was like, oh my God, it's tan. So this is the greatest day of my life. We wrapped it up. We literally flexed it, took it right to Barnwell Mountain, went wheeling with it. I put it on the trailer. I left from Barnwell and went back to California where I was living at the time. Wheeled it like that for a while, took it out to Hammers, had a really good time with it. It needed rocker guards and some other stuff. Went off-road evolution, we built a bumper and, you know, just started picking at it. It was just a fun vehicle, you know. I loved it at that setup because it was so cheap. Like, you know, it had to be trailered everywhere, especially in California. But it was just a fun vehicle. And I was like, oh, this is great. I'm just going to leave it like this. How the whole Viper engine came to be was a joke. A lot of manufacturers have crusher cars. If you're not familiar with what that is, basically a manufacturer will send a vehicle to be tested or evaluated by maybe a journalist or, you know, some other organization, and they don't have VIN numbers and they don't have VINs on the block, and basically you go and evaluate this vehicle and then they take it back at the end of its evaluation or tour loop and it gets crushed. There happened to be a Dodge Viper at the old Petersen's building, and I was like, oh man, is that a crusher car? I'd love to have that engine and put it in the Durango. It was a joke. There was never like, I thought that was really going to happen type thing. And before I knew it, that joke kind of made its way up the flagpole at Dodge. And I ended up getting a phone call from a guy named Pete Gladys that was getting ready to retire. And Pete was kind of a top dog, if you will, in the Viper department and world, and said, hey, I heard you want to put a Viper engine in a Durango. You think that actually work? And I said, well, you know, I think if I took an 8.3 liter and a 48 RE, I think it's possible. And he said, well, maybe. He said, who do you think would help you do this? And I said, well, I'm really good friends with a guy named Tom Sessions, which is a master Viper tech in Wilmington. And I've got a handful of other places that I think would, really smart fabricators and knowledgeable guys that would help make this. And I said, I think we could do it. And so he said, okay, well, let me talk to some people and I'll get back with you. He's like, where would you think you'd build it? I was like, probably National Speed. And I was like, they're, you know, based in Wilmington, blah, blah, blah. Before I knew it, a few months had gone by and I didn't really think much of it. I was like, well, that was just kind of it was an honor to be able to talk to Pete. That's the way I kind of took it, and for someone to listen to my weird harebrained idea that was never going to happen. Next thing I know, I got a text message from Jordan at National Speed saying, hey, man, we've got a Dodge Viper engine here with your name on it. Can you give me some insight on what's going on? I'm like, oh, wow. So just like that, I had a Viper engine that basically came from Era Racing Engines, which was doing all of the Viper warranty work. And Todd had sent me an engine that had 8.3 liter, like the Ram SRT-10 oil pan on it. So I had the truck pan, accessories, the intake was all set up right for like it was going in a truck with an automatic. It's also worth mentioning that Era Racing Engines was responsible for all of the Dodge Viper racing engines in that program at this time. This includes the cars that took on the 24 Hours Le Mans, so I had no doubt that my engine packing 540 horsepower and 580 pound-feet of torque was more than reliable. The first thing we had to do was pull my stock 5.9 liter V8 and 46 RE transmission. This setup would actually eventually get swapped into my Jeep Wrangler TJ, where it's still there today. Test fitting the engine, we quickly found that it was way too long to fit within the confines of the stock engine bay. The top load Rockwell axle was not helping this issue, as the Viper block is not only long, but it's tall. Not only would we need to reinforce the frame for the added weight of the 625 pound block, but we would end up chopping up most of the original firewall to make it fit. Moving the engine back nearly 15 inches past the firewall required a custom dog box to be made. This job primarily fell on the shoulders of Paul Murray. To create the powertrain cover, he fabricated a skeleton which would serve as his sheet metal template. Once the box was finished, it was coated and fit with a DEI heat shield. This new box also meant that the gas pedal and brake pedal would have to be fabricated and moved over. Once we knew the engine would fit, work went into crafting the headers. Using Bellinger collectors, a tri-Y setup was built, which would pair the 2 1/4 collectors to go into a 3-inch dump on each side. Backing the V-10 would be a fully built 48 RE automatic transmission from NADP. Not only did they build me a bulletproof transmission, but a custom torque converter to manage the power effectively. A block spacer and SRT-10 flex plate were used to mate up the engine and transmission. Backing the transmission is a 4-speed Atlas transfer case with a 2-to-1 ratio in the main case and 2.72 in the underdrive unit. Since the factory fuel delivery wasn't going to cut it for the Viper engine, we pulled the stock tank and built a 17-gallon fuel cell along with a custom skid plate to protect it. Sending the fuel would be a Walbro pump with a rate of 255, which was paired with a set of Aeromotive inline fuel filters. The 8.3 liter is a returnless style fuel system, so an Aeromotive bypass regulator was also used. Keeping everything cool would be a radiator from Flexolite, along with the company's twin puller fan setup and a single pusher fan up front. Mounted along front was also an engine cooler and transmission cooler. While there were a few wiring wizards involved with merging the Durango and SRT harness together, I wanted to make sure that I could easily keep track of the Durango's vitals at a glance. So this custom gauge cluster was crafted using Phantom series gauges from Autometer. Since we didn't want to change the Durango suspension or overall height, we had to install an oil filter relocation kit. Not only did we change this, but we added in a Moroso accumulator, so if there was ever an issue where the engine might potentially starve off-road, I could give it a help with a quick flip of a lever from inside of the cab. A couple years after owning it, it kind of got pushed to the wayside because I had other vehicles that I needed to build for the magazines. I had shifted from Petersens and gone to four-wheeler. There was just a lot of moving pieces, and I had a buddy that really wanted that Durango, and I was like, I don't really want to sell it. It's just, I'll never be able to get what, it's worth, and blah, blah, blah. And he made me a pretty fair price on it, but he's basically retired right now, and he's got other things that's keeping him busy. So I'm going to try. This is my goal for 2024, to get that thing driving, and let's go take it somewhere, whether that's to my buddy's 600-acre farm or we go actually take it up the mountains and go rock crawl. That's going to be up to him. And if he doesn't love it anymore, maybe I'll bring it back into my fold of vehicles. So that's kind of what's going on with that vehicle. I hate that there's not more videos of that thing, but I'm working on it, I promise you. And hopefully this answers some questions and gives people some backstory on that vehicle. And yes, it still exists. That's why I built it again, was because we just didn't want to build Jeeps. Well, hopefully this clears up some stuff. If you got any questions, just drop them in the comments. I can link people out to all the different articles. I want to see, there was a total of like 24 articles on this thing over a handful of years where I kind of did the build progression. But yeah, that's kind of how that build went. And if you Google heavy metal mutter, Dodge Durango, everything should come up. Phase 2 would be all of the Viper stuff. Phase 1 is all of the more low buck stuff. So that's it for this video. Appreciate you guys watching. Hope to see you on the trail. Take care.